So, hello everyone. My name is Sandy Gomes, and I am a program manager here at WXN. So first off, I'd like to welcome you all to our February virtual book club session. And we are so pleased to have Fotini Iconomopoulos joining us today. Nicknamed the Negotiator as a child, she's been owning her skills with her entire life and engaging audiences all over the world through her expertise in negotiation, communication, and persuasion. As a sought-after expert for more than a decade, Fotini has been empowering Fortune 500 executives and their teams to achieve their objectives and guide them through high-stake negotiations. And on occasion, she does have some time to return to the classroom as an instructor of MBA negotiations at the Schulich School of Business in Toronto. And in addition to her features on TV, media, and outlets including CNBC, Forbes, and Harvard Business Review, she has been recognized with multiple awards, including a 40 Under 40 award. Congratulations, Fotini. That's great. So today we have the honor of her presence as she shares with us her simple and innovative strategies with her book, Say Less, Get More, Unconventional Negotiation Techniques to Get What You Want. Please join me in welcoming Fotini to our virtual book club. We can't wait to dive into your book, Fotini, so that we can learn more about why negotiation is not a one-size-fits-all. Please feel free to ask any questions along the way in the chat box, and we will also be having a Q&A period at the end of the session. Now, thank you, and over to you, Fotini.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I'm always so happy to speak to groups like this because I think it's so important to understand what negotiation actually is. And you know, this book came about a few years ago because HarperCollins tapped me on the shoulder and they said, we think you have a book in you. And I was like, well, that's nice, but why? Because there's so many books on negotiation out there already. But one of the problems with the books out there, or at least the relationship that people have with the books, is that most people will look at a negotiation book and go, that's not me. I'm not the one in the boardrooms. I don't wear a power suit. That has nothing to do with me. And the whole purpose of doing what I do is to help people, not just in those Fortune 500 companies that I assist, but help people in their everyday lives achieve more of what they want. I want people to get more. I thought it would be helpful to give you a little bit of background on my career and why anyone would think that I am equipped to talk about this subject. And as Sandy mentioned, I was given the nickname the Negotiator as a child. My dad gave me that nickname because if you've ever seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, that is exactly how I grew up. I tell a few stories about my childhood in the book as well. So I had to negotiate my way out of the house to prom, to all of those things. But I also got to witness firsthand what negotiation looked like. It was a normal thing in my household. It was normal for, my dad to negotiate something at the electronics store or at the car dealership, or even my grandmother in the market in Greece. Like, she'd be negotiating for tomatoes. And that for me was a normal thing to do. And so it was mind blowing to me later on in life when people didn't see that as a normal thing to do. And so I, of course, started a family business when I was 17 with my parents. I was working at a leather shop in our local mall. And my dad said to me, after about a year of me working there and making some really great commissions, he said, so I need you to quit your job next month. And I said, why? He goes, because we're opening up our own leather store, our leather and fur store next month. And I said, what do you know about leather and fur? We come from years of every single fast food type of thing and restaurant businesses and pizza shops. And he's like, I know I have a smart kid. I was like, no pressure, just the family mortgage on the line. And so we started a business together, and I was negotiating as a teenager with manufacturers over in Montreal who were supplying us with coats, and we went to the bank together for finances. And my eyes were open to all of these opportunities to negotiate things like interest rates and finances and loans and all of that kind of stuff as well. So I was just always immersed in it, but I knew family business wasn't for me because my father and I would probably kill each other if I stayed too much longer. So I went away to university and I studied everything under the sun, from arts and science, in my first degree to French which turned into my major. And then I went, well, this isn't enough education, so let me go back and do my MBA. And I studied organization behavior because what I realized was the common thread in any career path that I chose, because I still hadn't figured out what I wanted to be when I grew up, was I was going to have to deal with people. And if I could understand people, then I would be able to do whatever I needed to do in life. I can learn finance from a book. I was really good at academics and taking tests and all that kind of stuff, but people was what really interested me the most. So studying that organization behavior really set a path for me for a very interesting career without knowing it. I left my MBA and I started working for companies like L'Oreal. L'Oreal was my first job out of school. There's some stories in the book about my time there as well. And I was negotiating with Walmart from the very beginning on a daily basis. I was one of the youngest people sitting in that Walmart waiting room to wait and have meetings with the buyers and so on. So I got to play on a very global scale with someone else's money and practice my negotiation skills. I saw firsthand what great relationship skill building could do. And I had some really unique circumstances even when I was there. One of my favorite successful negotiation outcomes at L'Oreal was when I was given a new portfolio. So, I was working on Maybelline and Garnier and L'Oreal, Paris skincare and makeup and all that stuff. And they said, we want you to take over the Men Expert line too. And that was with a completely different buyer. And he notoriously hated working with us. He felt like it was forced on him. He would rather be dealing with the folks in the razor blades who were making millions of dollars for him. And he wouldn't even answer emails and phone calls from anybody at L'Oreal. And then one afternoon I was sitting in the lobby waiting to see my sun care buyer, because that was also another category that I was dealing with. And he saw me sitting there and he stopped to say hello. And we had a quick chat. So lovely to see you. I'll see you next time I'm in to see you. And behind him walked this very small man who I recognized, and I recognized his face. The following morning at 7 a.m., I had an email in my inbox saying, I want to meet you at 4 o'clock or something to that effect so you can walk me through your lineup of products. And it was the men's care buyer. Now, I didn't start that conversation with him. It started because he witnessed the relationship and the trust that I had with his buddy that he was going out to lunch with the day before, my sun care buyer. And so I started to also understand some of the implications of my relationships and their halo effects and how I could use others to influence the negotiation process. And as a result, I managed to save a lot of listings and list some new products in there. I don't think he still loved dealing with me, but he did it. And so that opened a whole bunch of doors for me and a lot of opportunities to practice these skills that most people don't realize they're practicing on a daily basis. It's not just about, cash and exchanging hands, even though that felt like it was the case a lot when I was dealing with Walmart. It was building relationships. It was building trust. It was having conversations. It was making people want to deal with you over somebody else. And I will say my entire business exists today because of the relationships that I built when I was working for somebody else. Years later, I left the manufacturing world and I started working for a training company who was hired to train us to be better negotiators with the Walmarts of the world and such. And they poached me and they brought me in. They said, you should really be doing what we do. And I was like, yeah, sure. Someday when I've got more experience. I was still in my 20s. And they said, no, seriously, you should be doing what we do. And these guys were in their 40s and they were telling us about how they were crisscrossing the globe and working with CEOs. And I was like, what CEO is going to listen to me? And they went, no, seriously, you need to do it. And it took them 8 months to convince me to come on board and join their company. And the second I did, they threw me off the deep end. And I was training. I remember my very first workshop was the head of a multi-billion-dollar oil and gas organization and a junior buyer at Walmart in the same room. And so I was now in this room and I was using my negotiation skills to make them listen to me, to make them see me as credible, to make them understand that I had something to offer. And so I was negotiating for my airtime. I was negotiating for their respect. I was negotiating to make sure that they were going to recommend me going forward and all of that other kind of stuff too. Now, a number of years went by and I stopped working for that organization. I decided that our values were headed in different directions. And so I decided to take a break. I'd been working for a really long time since I was a teenager. And I thought maybe this is the time to take a few months off before I take my next step. And it was clients who kept calling and going, Fotini, it's great that you trained our team, but we have 100 million on the line, or we have $1 billion on the line, or hey, Fotini, when are you going to come back and work with us? We're still going through this negotiation that you were helping us with. And I said, I don't work for that company anymore. And they said, we didn't hire the company. We hired Fotini. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just do you this one favor until I have to get a real job. And February 5th, 2015 was the day I said those words. And 7 years later, I can admit that it is indeed a real job. And so many things have happened since then. I've been tapped on the shoulder to speak on huge stages. I've been tapped on the shoulder to help with multi-billion-dollar negotiations. I have been asked to come back and teach MBA students at my alma mater. And all of that has brought me so much joy. And then to be tapped on the shoulder and asked to write this book. Well, this was really the first time I got to open the door to learning to folks who I had to tell, sorry, you can't come and audit my MBA class. There's already a wait list of Schulich students who are doing that. Or if you don't work for this company, you can't join that training session. So my hope in reading this book is that you start to get some of these nuggets that my clients and my audiences have been getting for so long, and you start to act out some of the stories that you'll read in the book. Because in the book itself, I include stories from audience members who sat in on a 20-minute keynote and said, this thing that you said changed my life. And I got $20,000 more because I remembered this one thing, or I managed to start my business, or I increased my profits, or I doubled my income. Like, there's so many wonderful things. And one of the stories that touches my heart the most is one that I share in the epilogue section about a student who told me that she left an abusive relationship because she realized the power dynamics that were at play. She realized some of the things that were going on and how she was letting them happen. And lately I've been talking about how negotiation is really just a synonym for self-advocacy. And so what she got out of our time together in my class over the course of 12 weeks was she learned how to speak up for herself. She learned a new language. She learned about power dynamics, and she learned how to stand up for herself in a way that she didn't feel comfortable doing before. And so there's so many of these stories that I've sprinkled in throughout the book that I hope you take to heart, that I hope give you the strength to do whatever it is you want to do next as well, because I have seen firsthand the joy that it can bring others. And I also wanted to share, I was asked to read something today, which I find very strange because I was reading my own book recently, realizing I hadn't read some of those words in well over a year. And I came across a statistic that said that most people don't actually finish the books that they read, which I find shocking because I finish, I think, 99% of everything that I start. But I think the easiest part and the most enjoyable part of the writing process for me was writing the epilogue. At first, it was supposed to just be a summary of, okay, here's all the things that you learned. And I wanted to sprinkle in a few more stories of success stories so people could connect the dots and go, yes, it's not just theory, here's how it actually works in real life. And then I thought, well, people ask me all the time, what about the ones that go badly? What about the negotiations that don't work out the way you expect them to? And so that was what I decided I wanted to share with you today. So I'm going to read you a story that kind of kicked off my entire negotiation career, in a sense. Like, since I left that last company, these stories were the catalyst for wanting to help others and for doing something that served me much more than just taking what someone said to me at face value. So if you do have the book, this is the section on page 304, but I'm going to read it to you now. And so the section is called, "What about when you don't get what you set out to achieve?" "Are you happy now?" he asked as he gave me a smug look. I'll never forget that moment, even though it seems like ages ago. I was at a sales conference in the Caribbean with my former employer. I had just been promoted and had confronted HR about a salary issue related to my new assignment. I should share that I had previously negotiated a salary increase at this same workplace as part of a promotion, even before I became a negotiation consultant. And I plan to use the same strategy here, a civil conversation full of questions and cooperative behavior. I even had the knowledge that the company could pay me more because I had just found my predecessor's old contract left carelessly on the photocopier. So I was expecting a salary comparable to hers. We had the same amount of work experience, and she was known to make mistakes. So I'd had the responsibility of checking her work before it went to the client. There were also some power dynamics working in my favor because my taking the promotion triggered a domino effect for 3 other people who were going to shift roles. If I delayed this process, it would affect all of those subsequent moves, and HR wanted to have everything sorted out before the weekend when we were headed off to the Caribbean. Even with all of these factors in my favor, the salary offer fell significantly short of my predecessor's compensation. And I was the one who had been correcting her mistakes. It was the end of the day on Thursday when I spoke to the HR rep who had presented my offer. When it wasn't greeted with a burst of joy, my response was a delayed, hesitant, "Okay." She asked what was wrong. I told her I was surprised I chose my words carefully so as not to insult anyone, to see that the offer wasn't as high as I expected, especially as I'd received larger increases when moving up from previous roles. She told me she personally couldn't do anything about the offer, but she would talk to her boss and promised to get back to me with some information the following morning. I thanked her and we ended cordially. I thought it was a pleasant conversation. I relayed the details to a colleague who had coached me through the negotiation, the highest paid manager in the group, who seemed to know what he was doing. And he agreed that it sounded positive. I never heard back from the HR rep. Instead, first thing in the morning, I got a call from my manager's manager, the vice president of my division, telling me he had received a call from the VP of Human Resources, who told him that he was ready to fire this ungrateful employee he had heard about. Whoa, that escalated quickly. My VP asked why I was so curt in demanding more money. What? That wasn't what had gone down. The HR rep had offered to take it up before I even had a chance to make a counter proposal. My boss's boss was shocked when I gave him the recap, followed by, "Do you really think I would say anything that stupid?" Fortunately, he didn't. He also thought it was odd, which is why he told HR he would sort things out. We determined that there was not going to be any change to my offer, and that we needed to do some damage control. He would tell them that I was happy to take the offer as it stood, and he advised me that when I saw the VP of HR at the hotel, I should politely smile and nod to rectify the situation. The equivalent of groveling for forgiveness for challenging the king. I felt sick to my stomach. Some game of broken telephone and some fragile egos were conspiring to keep me earning less money than I deserved? No way. I didn't get what I wanted in that negotiation, but I got something much better. The confirmation that it was time to go, and a fun last hurrah in the Caribbean with my work friends. I had discovered my resistance point. It was time to explore my BATNAs, which led me to a job with a much higher salary and way fewer work hours. My most memorable negotiation wasn't my most fruitful, but it was the most life-changing. A colleague was complaining to me about his latest salary increase. I was happy to lend a supportive ear, but in the process, I learned that his disappointing increase was bigger than mine. This, despite my greater experience, seniority, and quantitative results. I was livid. I knew our boss had played favorites. Spoiler, the favorite was not me, despite my positive evaluations, but this was ridiculous. I set up a meeting with my boss to discuss the matter. I prepared. I had questions ready. I had done some internal research and I had data ready. And I was prepared to implement all of my negotiation skills. So I raised the issue, but not surprisingly, the conversation escalated quickly. I was accused of not bringing in the same results as my peer. I had the emails and data to dispute those claims, showing I had brought in more. When he was backed into a corner with no excuses left, he started lying, telling me about how he had stuck his neck out for me, along with some other cliches about what a wonderful manager he was. He wasn't. He had no examples to support his claims, and he was eventually relieved of his management role. If there's one way to get under my skin, it's lying to me. I see red, and just as my blood started boiling and my voice started getting louder, I paused. I had this out-of-body experience. I was watching this all go down, and I realized that the more I said, the more ammunition I would give him to call me emotional, a trait that wasn't well received in that business. I would only end up giving him the excuses he needed to put me in a category that wasn't as shiny and bright as his favorite employees, which would justify his discriminatory pay scale. I should add here that I was the only woman on the team, so that's why it wasn't so surprising to me that I wasn't his favorite. Nope, I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to hand that to him. I was going to come out shining and rational. Say less, get more. So I paused to let all of these thoughts go through my mind, and I said, "Thank you." I've never seen a more confused look on someone's face. I thought my video screen had frozen. I clarified, "If you're telling me you stuck your neck out for me, then thank you." He looked a little relieved, as though he had gotten away with it. Until, "I'll take it from here," I told him. "If you've done everything you can, then I'll take it from here. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night knowing I haven't done everything I can to rectify it." That's when the look of panic came over his face. I don't think you should raise this with HR or my boss. This confirmed exactly what I suspected. He had done nothing for me. His personal bias and ego were driving this decision. I'll spare you some of the sordid details because I've made my point, but I'll fast forward to tell you that I did raise it with his boss, and that conversation went similarly. It started with lies. But instead of letting my heated Mediterranean blood take over and losing my temper, I paused. I had that out-of-body experience again and asked a series of questions that forced him to get caught in his lies and expose himself. It was so satisfying. And yet, there was no way I was going to rectify this salary issue, even after a second attempt. Once again, my negotiation outcome wasn't what I set out to achieve, but what I got was so much more valuable. I proved to myself that I was working with people who were never going to acknowledge my worth and no longer shared my values. It confirmed my suspicions and that I had hit my breaking point. This negotiation provided all the validation I needed to take my next step out the door. And I did. I left that company and it felt amazing. I'm not sure I'd feel so great about this situation if I hadn't been so well prepared or paused to execute so meticulously. I might not have felt so confident about the outcome. I might not have left. Sometimes you just can't change minds or people. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, even when you've done everything by the book, you just don't make it over the finish line. Sometimes it's because they really didn't have the budget. Other times, some information you weren't privy to wasn't factored into your strategy. And sometimes it just comes down to people being ruled by their irrational emotions or biases, and you just can't change them. And not even the best therapist can crack those nuts. There are always variables that are beyond your control that can affect your outcome. And when that happens, you could beat yourself up and consider yourself a failure. I've been there. Or you can use it as a jumping off point to realize your worth and seek out the conditions that will meet them. I know it's not easy to do overnight, but having that glimmer of hope that there is something better out there and that you can invest your energy in finding it makes getting through the day a lot easier. It also builds confidence. Among the hundreds of messages I get that document success stories, there's always an occasional note to tell me that someone who made the effort didn't achieve their desired result. But even that one is always accompanied by a story of how they feel so much more confident and prepared to advocate for themselves, carry themselves with credibility, and look forward to the next opportunity. That one negotiation may be a lost battle, but it's one step closer to winning the war. Every time you stand up for yourself, you'll appear a little taller, both to yourself and to others. And that feels freaking amazing. Knowing how to stand up for yourself is one of the greatest lessons you can learn. And I hope that is your greatest takeaway from this book. Negotiation is about more than money. It's about self-worth. So I'll leave you to read the rest of it. But I thought it was really important that everybody hear that message, especially if it's statistically likely that you won't get to that part of it. But I also thought it was important for you to hear from me firsthand that, yeah, not everything is perfect and not every negotiation is going to work out the way you want it to. But what you take out of that situation, you can then mold and use to create a better outcome for yourself. I know it sounds wishy-washy and perhaps even cliche at times, but I've always had the attitude of, I refuse to be a victim of my circumstances. I want to be a victor. I want to be the one that uses those circumstances as a stepping stone to do something more. And I will tell you that one of those situations I read about resulted in a lot of litigation and lawyers and all of that stuff because I took it one step further. And if it wasn't for that, when people do hear, the few people who have heard about the details of it, when they say, I'm sorry you went through that, my answer is, I'm not, because had I not gone through it, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have the public platform. I wouldn't have the drive and desire and fire in me to help others make sure they don't end up in those situations. I wouldn't have had a book offer from HarperCollins, and I certainly wouldn't be here in front of you today. So every time I am faced with one of those awful situations, I use it as fuel to help me propel me forward to do something even better. And it's not an easy thing to do, and it can be mentally exhausting at times. But I personally think that sitting at home and crying about it is going to be even more exhausting for someone like me. So my hope is this book gives you lots of tools to be able to do that for yourselves as well. Of course, we have time together to talk about some of the situations that you're facing or questions you may have about the book or anything else that you may want to talk about today. So I guess, Sandy, I'm going to pass the baton back to you. I do see one comment in the chat, though, that I'm going to address. Did you smile and nod at the VP of HR that day, just trying to understand how you dealt with the situation before you left the company? I did. It was one of those things where it was the fakest smile I could ever put on my face, but I did it because that was what I needed to do to get through that moment. Anything else I would have done in that moment, it was literally trapped on an island. So I wasn't going to escape this particular individual. I was going to save this for later. And so to get through that moment, I shook his hand. I kept it as short as possible. I used the say less, get more mantra before I even knew it was my mantra. And I would just get through and walk away. And it really was the catalyst, that just the way he shook my hand and that look on his face was that moment where I went, oh yeah, I'm so done. If you are the leaders of this organization, I'm not sticking around to find out what's next here. So there was a bit of satisfaction even for me too, to go, huh, really, you think I'm going to stick around and deal with more abuse like this? I don't think so. So it was difficult, but it was important to me to make sure I left with grace as well.
Great, great. We do have here a question, a hand up. So go ahead, Andrea. You can ask your question if you'd like.
Hi, thank you. It's easier to talk than write it. Hi, Fotini. Nice seeing you in this. So, love your book, love everything that you do. You know, I follow you and everything. So thank you so much for. My question is like, everything is great in business, right? I mean, sales, like all the preparation, everything is fantastic when you have to face a buyer. But when it comes to the personal stuff, I feel like that data gathering is very complicated and it's kind of hard to find, right? It's like buying a house, like lowering a mortgage and all those things. Can you talk a little bit about how to translate from the business sense of gather data and to everyday stuff?
So what makes the everyday stuff so much more difficult is the stakes are higher. So especially when you're working for someone else, I'm not going to say to entrepreneurs that the stakes aren't high, because I'm in that boat and I get it. But usually when you're working for someone else, you're not usually going to get fired if something goes wrong or the stakes are really low. Or even if you call your phone company and say, I want a better rate, they're not going to drop you as a client. But when you're dealing with someone who you're going to have to call up and maybe deal with over and over again, when it's somebody at home, when your peer at work instead of the client, and you go, I don't want to disappoint this person. I'm going to have to deal with this person again. Now it's your ego on the line too. It's also their feelings that you're worried about. And I understand that. That's what makes it so much more daunting to us. And so when that happens, when your brain starts to go, oh God, the stakes are so much higher. It's my mortgage for the next 20 years. It's this for whatever. Then your anxiety increases significantly. And that can become a bottleneck in terms of how rational you are, or how productive you are in that moment. And so one of the things that we need to be thinking about is, how do I diminish some of that anxiety? How do I calm that down? And there are some tools out there about managing stress and all that kind of stuff, like meditative breaths or something I always recommend. So breathing in for 4, holding for 6, and out for 8 will give you some pause in that moment. There's things like positive mantras, like I've got this, I deserve this, I am enough, anything that works for you in that moment. When you say it enough, you start to believe it. Power poses are another really great one, because they will allow your brain to catch up to what your body is telling others. So those are the kind of like the micro things that you can do in the moment. But if you want to think even bigger in the macro, it's about understanding that what are the consequences for you? Like lay out a list of the pros and cons. What's the worst? I ask my clients all the time this too, because when they hire me for high stakes stuff, it's because they're feeling super anxious. They don't spend a ton of money on bringing someone like me in unless they are freaking out. And so when I start to talk to them about it and I say, what is the worst that's going to happen? Then they go, okay, well, maybe they'll delist our product, which means we won't make as much money. Okay, what can we do to prevent that from happening? Or maybe are they going to kick you out of the office? Are they going to say you're a terrible human being? Are they going to do all of these things that perhaps your brain is going to overdrive and thinking that that might happen? But when they think about it rationally and I ask the question, they go, well, no, that is unlikely to happen. Okay, but in the event it does, what can we do to prevent that from happening? Well, we can approach them with a collaborative way. We can approach them with a question instead of banging our fists on the table and saying, you must do this. We can mention some market data, which makes us look much more credible so that they don't think we're just pulling this out of thin air. There's all of these things that you can do, but you have to ask the question. Sometimes I feel like I'm this downer in a room when I go, what's the worst that could happen? We just start thinking about all the terrible things that could happen. But then once we've dug that hole deep enough, we start filling it in and going, well, it's not going to happen because I'm going to do this. And it's not going to happen because I'm going to do that. And it's not going to happen because I'm going to do this. And even if it does happen, what am I going to do to repair the relationship? What am I going to do to make sure that it doesn't end up as bad as I think it might be? So if you can make a plan like that, it's almost like a decision tree to a degree. When you know you have a plan to prevent it and you have a plan to resolve it, it takes some of the sting out of it for you. And it helps to relieve some of that stress, and it makes you want to go ahead and do it. I mean, even if I thought about those circumstances I read to you and I said, what's the worst that could happen? They're going to fire me. Well, then it's going to have to go through the employment board. They're not going to have a leg to stand on why they fired me. Then it's going to be, okay, I'm going to get paid to sit down for a while and look for my next job. If I think about it rationally, then I can think it through. Even with my own business, I'm like, okay, if this fails, yeah, I might not be able to pay my mortgage, but I have a big asset that I can sell. I can move in with my parents. I can move in with my sister. I can rent a cheaper place. Like I think about all these things going, worst case scenario. If you stop at just the worst case scenario and you end there, you're going to be freaking out. But if you go, all right, well, here's the solutions to those worst case scenarios. Maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. And that includes thinking about the relationships. They might be mad at me for a second, but they're going to move on. So those are some of the things to think about. And when it comes to just the mindset going in, if you've done that exercise, the mindset shouldn't be as big of a problem. But I encourage you to reflect on the fact that women especially will go to bat harder for someone else than they will for themselves. And so if you know that to be true about yourself, if you find it easier to go and fight for someone else, great. But what would you want someone fighting for you for? And don't you deserve the same? And so some self-compassion can also help propel you forward and get you into the mindset for everything that you want to accomplish as well. So if you're doing all of the things, if you're preparing effectively, if you're doing all of that, you're leaving no stone left unturned. All the tips that I wrote in the book and all the tips I used myself in some of those awful circumstances, even the most awful of circumstances can end up turning into a great situation because you've done all that prep. You now know what to do with that information and move forward. Part of my moving forward was actually pursuing it legally because it was just not sitting well enough with me. And so those are part of my moving forward. And another situation was finding another job. But because I'd done the research on the market out there and what I knew other people were getting paid for similar jobs, it made it so much easier for me to walk away. And when they put the nail in the coffin about how they were going to treat me, it just went, oh, okay, well, here's this other thing. I didn't want to leave because there were so many things I liked about this. But if you're diminishing the things I like about this, well, then it makes it leaving for me a lot easier. And so I'd ask you to think about the consequences and think about what you could be missing out on and how you're going to manage those consequences. And then go, well, do you deserve it? You sure as hell do. And you would be doing that for someone else. So why wouldn't you do it for yourself? So I know that was a lot of stuff coming at you from a million different directions. So I'd love to know if that helped.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just more in the data gathering for stuff, but yeah, it helps. It gives me thoughts. Thank you.
So for data gathering specifically, for job offers and things like that, is a little bit easier. You go to Glassdoor, you can do lots of statistics. If you are still in touch with your school, you can go to the Career Center, even if you're a graduate and so on, and get that data. When it comes to mortgages, when it comes to telecom bills, when it comes to that kind of stuff, again, there's a lot of research out there on Google, but there's other people who specialize in that as well. So whether it's real estate agents, whether it's mortgage brokers, whether it's any of those folks who specialize in that kind of stuff, but people are one of your greatest resources. If you go to somebody and just go, hey, you've got an expertise in this. I'm really curious in what you might have to say about it. I'd love to hear about your expertise. Usually that's a nice kind of, people love to hear that you're great at this. It's a nice compliment and they love to talk about their expertise. So, those people out there, who can you be talking to? There's just so many resources now. I feel like for any negotiation, there's very little excuse to say, well, I don't know, but we do know, we know a lot. So what do you know, and who else can help you fill in some of those gaps? And worst case scenario, if the stakes are low, take a guess. I mean, the telecom company, take a guess. Just ask them a question. What can you do to improve this? Even with the mortgage brokers, how can you improve this? How can you make this more competitive? You don't have to cite other data just by asking a question. put them on the spot a little bit. And there's lots of, again, some of the techniques I talk about in the book that will force them to sharpen their pencils a little bit.
Great question. Great.
Thank you.
That was a great question, Andrea. We do have another one here, and we also have some other that came to us before the session. So we'll go with this question. Have you ever felt overwhelmed and as a result had regrets with something you might have said? How did you follow up or apologize?
I feel overwhelmed a lot. That I think is just part of throwing yourself into uncomfortable situations, and negotiation for most people is uncomfortable situations. I mean, the circumstances I shared with you are probably the ones where there was the most potential for me to have regret, but fortunately, I would say that I didn't. I would say the ones where I'm most likely to have regret are the ones that are personal. So a family member or a good friend or something to that effect, because those are the ones where we don't stop quite as much. We don't usually have the same level of courtesy. It's a lot harder to press our mental pause button to be able to do that because we're so caught up in it. Part of it is our subconscious going, well, they're related to me or they're such good friends with me. Even if I abuse them, they'll come back for more. And so, you know, when you think about the people that you are furthest from, those are the ones you're probably most cordial and polite to. And then the closer people are to you, the more you are given the leeway to abuse them a little bit more. And I use that word loosely, but I think you all know what I mean. So the courtesy kind of diminishes a little bit. I will say, I definitely have had regrets about talking to my dad because he's so damn careful in how you talk to him, and you have to tiptoe around him. It's like walking on eggshells. Very rarely do we apologize in my family, but it's always nice to hear. I will say, like, for example, my dad called me recently and he said, I asked him about some humidifiers. Last year, unfortunately, my family had COVID and I was running an hour away and bringing humidifiers and the drugs and the thermometers and all the things I could drop at their doors. And this year, when it looked like someone might get sick again, I was like, where are the humidifiers? And my dad was like, I don't have the humidifiers. You have the, he started yelling at me because this is what he does. You have the humidifiers. I'm like, Dad, I live in a condo. I know every square inch of storage space in here. I guarantee you, I don't have them. Go to the basement and look for the humidifiers. And he said, no, they can't possibly be there. I'll check tomorrow though. So he called me the next morning and he said, so did you find those humidifiers? And I said, I don't have them. And he goes, he started laughing at me. He goes, yeah, I found them in the basement. That was not met with an apology. It was just, this is the way we do things in our family. I'm not saying apologies are not appropriate. They are. I would say that the advice I give people about apologies is if you have done something wrong, apologize and do it quickly. My dad's apology is a joke. For me, I would say I'm sorry, or I'd say oops, or whatever it is for that person. What do they need to hear to feel acknowledged? Because if you ignore an apology, what happens is they start stewing even more. They get more and more upset and they're going, when are you going to acknowledge it? When are you going to admit something to me? And it doesn't really go away. Even if they are polite enough at a subconscious level, they're still waiting for this. And so you could be allowing this to fester for a really long time. So if you have done something wrong, apologize and do it quickly. Hey, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry if I'd said something that was inappropriate. What can we do to move past it, or how can we make it right? Those might be great questions to follow up with. I would like to say that I can't think of a circumstance where I had a ton of regret, but I mean, I always feel guilty every time I get into a spat with my mother because she's the nicest person in the world, but we still get on each other's nerves. So I would say if you've done something wrong, apologize and do it quickly, but then move on. It's not about dwelling on that forever either. It's going, okay, I appreciate your patience in this. What can we do to move forward, instead of reminding them of how terrible things were between you, because that can also put a little bit of extra salt in the wound and make it harder for people to get over. So I wish I had a more colorful story for you, but apologies can be really simple. And I'd say the more you overcomplicate an apology, the less likely it's going to be satisfying to them. I think you can probably all remember things like memes that we see out there, or terrible political apologies that have been manhandled by a PR firm where they go, I'm sorry if something that I said was, or no, the word sorry is even missing. Like, I'm trying to think of an example of it. I just saw one recently. But when that word sorry isn't there, then that can be even more infuriating. Yeah, as Julia says, a non-apology. Those are even more infuriating. So apologize, do it quickly, say less, get more. Don't elaborate on it. Don't need to go down that path all over again, but give them the acknowledgement that they're seeking, and then talk about how you can move forward together.
Great answer. Great question. Okay, we have one that came into us. Would love to learn about how to create an authentic negotiation style.
Interesting. Okay. For me, authentic means within your own personality. And so I offer up in the book some communication stuff. There's a whole section where I give people here words that you can use more effectively. But one of the things that I also acknowledge at the very beginning of the book and any session I do is that negotiation isn't black and white. There's a lot of gray. And clients will ask me all the time, can I just put a little bug in my ear and you tell me what to say? And that would be so much fun for me. And it looks really cool in the movies. But the truth is, if you're not in the right mindset, or if you don't have the confidence to go in there, even when I tell you to say it, it's going to come out sounding ridiculous. I will also say, I have helped more than one friend manage a difficult divorce and some pretty nasty situations with narcissists. I've been up late on the phone with friends who are going, here's the text message you sent me. What do I send back? And I will say, here's the type of message you want to be sending. Here are the types of words you want to be using. But I'll always stop and say, is that something you would say? Is that language you would use? Because if it sounds like it's coming from someone else and not from you, then that could infuriate the other person even more. So when I say that, I'm helping them through writing the text message, but it can't just be my words. It'll be something like, when I see stuff like you did this and you did that and you did that. And I'm like, well, you pointing the finger at someone, you is going to make them really defensive. So what if when this happened, I felt this way? That's how I would tweak it and modifying. That's kind of the guardrails that I help people put up, as opposed to having to use language that would be really strange for them to use in the first place. So when it comes to being authentic, it's got to be your words, but your words with the guidance of knowing how is this person going to respond to it. So with my dad, it might be funny to do a joke. With someone else, it might not be so funny to do a joke. And I would say, I can't dictate to you what is authentic for you, but I will say, if you read the book and if you listen to some of these guideposts, where does it feel natural for you to sit within it? What is some of the language that you feel you can incorporate into your daily language? So for example, one thing that I tell people is when, here's an example you can even share in the chat. When someone does something nice for you and they say, or no, when you do something nice for someone rather, and they say, thank you. What is your natural response? You've just something, you've gone out of your way and they say, oh, thank you. What are you inclined to say automatically when someone says thank you? Go ahead and tell us in the chat. Andrew's giving my spoiler. Just doing my job, no problem. Some people would say you're welcome. The no problem thing comes up quite a bit. No worries is another one these days. Yeah, absolutely. So when you say something like, it's no problem, this is just part of my job, you are now conditioning them to go, oh, well, if it was no problem, then I guess I'll come back for more. And if it was no problem the next time, then I guess I'll come back for another dip in the well. And if you keep saying there's no problem, they're going to keep coming back for more. And then you're going to be wondering, why am I so burnt out? Why am I taking on more work than everybody else on my team? Maybe it's because you invited it in. And so what do? Well, some of the influence and language studies tell us things like, instead of no problem, saying, hey, I'm sure if roles were reversed, you'd do the same for me. And what happens when they hear something like that is at the subconscious level, they go, oh yeah, I would do the same for her. So when the opportunity comes up, whether it's 6 minutes from now or 6 months from now, I am going to find something nice to do for Fotini or for Sandy or whomever it is. And it may be forgotten at a conscious level, but it's there. It's planted in the bank of reciprocity or obligation in some way. Or if that doesn't happen, the other automatic response the brain does is they go, no, I wouldn't do the same for her. So I'm not going to keep coming back and asking her for this because I don't want to feel guilty about it. And then you've blunted it at that end. Now, I've had people in my sessions when I share that kind of stuff go, it feels really weird for me to say that. It feels really strange to say, I'm sure you do the same for me, because it's just not language I would use. And I'm like, that's fine. It's the principle behind that language I want you to think about. It's not throwing away that moment of power and saying no problem. Maybe it's acknowledgement of going, I appreciate that. And I hope it helps, as opposed to, feel free to come back and keep digging in more. So it's finding what would be natural in your voice while not throwing away that power dynamic. And so I could tell you, here are all the right things to say, but they have to be right for you. And so I can't dictate what your authenticity is, but I can tell you, here are some ways psychologically to pump yourself up. Here are some things that statistically or studies show us are going to be more helpful and more harmful. And given all of those tools now that you have, you choose the tool that is most comfortable for you. So I'd say the more research you do and the more practice you do, that's when you're going to get most comfortable finding where is your natural groove in this authenticity. And you might find it authentically to operate one way when you're dealing with a toddler, and another way when you're on a beach in Mexico negotiating for a souvenir, and another way when you're in the boardroom. And so I even had a cousin of mine last summer. I was in Greece working remotely for a few weeks, and I happened to do a TV appearance remotely. I was doing breakfast television or something from the beach. And my cousin watched the video afterwards. He goes, "You sound so different when you're doing that." I'm like, because I'm in my natural language. English is a lot easier for me than it is in Greek. So my authenticity comes across a little differently in one language versus another. Or when I'm in my element and I'm talking about the stuff I love, I talk faster and I'm more passionate. I'm more chilled out when you see me at the beach just hanging out. So it's about finding those little grooves for yourself, but working within the guideposts of here's what is going to be helpful and harmful to you. And so if you can find little opportunities to practice every day, if you can find, when you're having a conversation with someone, pausing a little longer to get them some extra time to make them feel like they're listened to. When you are going, well, where can I find a low stakes negotiation to practice these things? Call your cable company, call your telecom company, call the hydro company. They might say no to you, but you had a chance to practice, and they're not going to drop you as a client. I promise you, they still want your money. So there's call your bank and ask them for discounts and stuff like that. And you will find language, and you're going to go, well, that made me feel uncomfortable. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe that felt way more comfortable than I thought it would. Maybe you're going to go, I tried that and it worked. So now I feel like that's a new part of my authenticity and my vocabulary that I can build in. But it's really trial and error, along with some of the guidance that you'll get along the way from books like mine and so many other folks out there as well.
Good one. Okay, so we have another question here. And it's coming in, and this one has 3 questions, so we're just going to pick one. We'll have time to get a question from everyone. If I don't have a competitive offer at hand to compare, how can I still encourage a better offer from this company?
Great question, because not everybody has a competitive offer. And even when you do have one, it's not always healthy to say, well, look, I've got another offer, so you better match it or else. That can actually get you into more trouble. So yeah, even when people do have competitive offers, I tell them to tread really carefully. You don't need a competitive offer to push somebody to treat you better. So one of the things to do is to do some research, like what are competitive rates out there? If you can have that credible information from places like Glassdoor, PayScale, whatever the sources are, if you speak to people in your industry, if you belong to groups like WXN and you know other folks who have been in your shoes before, talk to them. And so that you have, more than anything, it's not about giving them the specific data. You don't need to quote a study. You don't need to quote your sources. I discourage you from doing that. There's a reason I say less, get more. But what you do have is the confidence to know I deserve what I'm asking for. I am credible in asking for this. And so you can go in there and say, hey, based on my knowledge of the market, based on what I know is competitive out there, based on what I know others in my field are getting, this doesn't seem quite as competitive as it could be. What can we do to make it more sustainable? I love the word sustainable because it signals to them, I'm trying to stay here for the long term. The ball's in your court. Instead of saying, if you don't make this more competitive, I'm going to leave, it's a more positive way of doing that, of framing it. So what can we do to make this more competitive, to make sure I feel valued? What can we do to make this more sustainable, to make sure that, we don't have a lot of turnover and things like that? So it's just asking questions. You're approaching it in a cooperative way. You're approaching it in a curious way, but you are also demonstrating that you are confident and you know that you deserve more than this here. And if they go, well, that's all we have, then I want you to ask even more questions to go, okay, well, what's keeping us from doing that? When will we have more? What milestones do you need to see in order to be able to compensate more? What's different about us versus some of the other folks that I'm hearing about out there in the market? I'd love to better understand this. There's a lot of really great things at this organization, and I just want to make sure I understand, the complete picture. I hope that helps solve that one.
Very good. Yes. The next question. What have you observed in terms of power dynamics between men and women? Asking from the perspective as someone who works in a male-dominated specialty.
Yeah, there is lots of data and science behind the fact that bias is still a very real thing. I talk about this a lot in the book. this was not a book created for women, but the purpose of the book was to make this the equivalent of the on-ramp versus the stairs. And I say that because the majority of the population, the dominant group, the able-bodied, can use the stairs, but not everybody can. But when you think of the on-ramp, everybody can walk on the ramp or roll on the ramp or make their way in. And so my mission in this book was to make sure that everybody could use the advice in it. I was sick and freaking tired of getting bad advice from men who didn't know what it was like for me. And so I know from personal experience, I talk about them quite a bit. I think I've mentioned a few of them in the book as well. I call them my betcha moments, where I was on the road, I was 30 years old and working, and all the other consultants out there were older men in their 40s and above. And I would step into an oil and gas company in Texas, and someone would say to me, you know, what are you going to teach me, little girl? And I would have another situation where I was drunk dialed by a client. And every time one of these things happened, I would send a note to my group of peers, my consulting peers, and say, and with the subject line, bet you've never. And so it was like, bet you've never been drunk dialed, bet you've never had this said to you, bet you've never been approached this way, bet you've never had someone bang their fist on the table and yell at you before. And all of those things happened because I was the only one that looked like me in my field. Negotiation is a male-dominated field. Consulting is a male-dominated field. Oil and gas is a male-dominated field. Construction is another one. Many of you work in male-dominated. Even law is still a male-dominated field when you get to the upper echelons, right? So there's a lot of those senior leadership roles that are still dominated by men. And because of that, there still exists a ton of bias. And so even though society as a whole is saying we're catching up, at a conscious level, we are trying really hard. At a subconscious level, when it comes to the negotiation process, there's still something going on in many people's brains. And it's not just men with women, it's women with women that goes, what are you asking me for this for? Shouldn't you just be grateful that you're out of the house and it's not 1956? So even women are harsher on women in negotiations as well as men. I'll tell you another study that I think I mentioned in the book with the Vienna Orchestra. And what they found was they had they didn't have enough women in the orchestra. So they thought maybe there's something wrong with their audition process. So they started doing blind auditions. So people would come in and they'd be behind a curtain and they'd play their instrument. They really didn't see an improvement in terms of how many women they were bringing in. Then they realized something else. At a subconscious level, people were picking up on the footsteps coming in. They could hear, without realizing it, that women were coming in dressier shoes or heels, and they could hear the difference in sound in those shoes between a man and a woman. So already at a subconscious level, your brain's going, hearing the man's footsteps going, this is going to be good. Or it's a woman's footsteps going, this isn't going to be quite as good. So what they did is they took it a step further and they did shoeless auditions. And that's when they finally started to see a change. That's how deep this is ingrained in our brains. I say that for a reason. And so because of that, I would love to be able to tell you women shouldn't have to change the way they negotiate. Women shouldn't have to change their behavior to get ahead in the workplace. And it's true, they shouldn't, but I'm not willing to wait another 100 years and everybody to walk around barefoot in order for that to happen. So what I am trying to do is give you the tools to go, here's how to take some of the edge off. If you want to avoid the bitchy labels, the greedy labels, the aggressive labels, and all of those things that come along with what we do, or if you want to avoid some of those uncomfortable situations, here are some of the guideposts that will help you get there. So it's things like asking questions instead of making demands. So when that gentleman down in Texas said to me, what are you going to teach me, little girl? I could have just started hurling insults right back at him. But instead I went, well, interesting. How would my age change the data and the science that I'm sharing with you? How does that affect what you're about to learn? So I can now ask a question back and saying, you're such a misogynist asshole. That's not going to get me very far, right? But I can ask a question to put him in his place politely and make sure that he now, the onus is on him to dig himself out of that hole. One other gentleman I remember in the middle of my workshop, I gave an example and I said, do you really believe that the buyers you deal with go home at night and are the same person that you see in the office? Do you think they go home and kick their dogs and abuse their spouses and yell at people all the time? And one of them stood up and yelled at me. He goes, yes, I do. I said, well, that's your prerogative to think so. And I walked away. Instead of saying, that's ridiculous, I'm not going to pick a fight with this man, but I am going to press my pause button and I'm going to keep my cool. One of the other things that I talk about to folks, especially to women, is, we're given the advice to mirror the other party. And that can help to a degree. When when they lean forward, if we lean forward, if we mirror some of their physical body language, there's a signal to their brain going, okay, she's one of us, and therefore I should feel more familiar with this person. One hostage negotiator talks about using the last 3 words that they said and mirroring that language back, and that can be helpful to a degree. However, it can also feel really contrived, and that can lead to distrust, just depending on your circumstances. And if you think about it, if someone yells, calm down, does that really make you feel more calm? But what if somebody changes the tone of their voice and they calm down a little bit and they slow down their speaking and they turn down the volume and they adopt a more soothing tone? Now you're going to feel a lot more soothed and you're probably going to respond in kind. So what I've always found is, instead of just focusing on mirroring them, I want you to be the mirror. If you are poised and if you are calm and if you are just so poignant in what you say, then they're going to have to do the same. If they start yelling at you, should you be mirroring them and yelling back? I mean, I shared an example of you. I was just about to launch into yelling at my boss when he started going off, going, I stuck my neck out for you and blah, blah, blah. I knew that was bull, but I could have just launched in doing the same. But I don't have the benefit of being a man with a penis. It's not acceptable for me to launch into doing exactly what he did. We expect it from him, but we don't expect it from someone that looks like me. So instead, I'm going to mirror what I expect him to do back. So later I have ammunition to go, look, all I did was ask you a question. All I did was speak to you in a way that was respectful, and I expect you to do the same in return. And I have done that approach so many times because I've been in so many of those awful misogynist situations, and it has worked every single time, every single one of them. You need to have a thick skin. You need to make sure that you can get your anxiety under control and your stress under control. But there is no way it won't work for you if you can start to channel that energy. And again, part of it for me is just going, you are not going to win this situation. You are not going to call yourself a victim of my emotions. I am going to take that emotion and I'm going to channel it into something that is going to overcome what is coming my way. So it's almost like the Wonder Woman when she does the whole like shield thing and she's got those little things that reflect bullets. That's what I feel like I'm doing. I'm not muting my emotions. I'm not telling you to be unemotional. I'm telling you to channel those emotions in a passion, in a way that is going to help you instead of hinder you. There definitely are dynamics at play. Men are given a balance beam that's like this, whereas women are given one that's like that. But I'm giving you things that will help support you to help you walk that line and start to slowly stretch it out. Society's got to help us do that, but it's going to take a long time before we get there.
So to that question, Leslie did ask, how did they respond to you when you go back with those pointed questions?
They just shut down. They stopped talking. I mean, that is the number one. Like I remember, even so, to kind of give you a little bit more color to one of the stories I told you about in the book, when I raised that salary issue with my boss's boss, the man who had been my mentor and who was now CEO of the company. And I said, here's the situation. I found out that I'm not getting paid the same as my peers. It's something that's disheartening. I tried raising it with so-and-so and it didn't go very well. And he said, Fotini, I don't know what you make. That's between you and Simon. And I said, okay, but this is an issue that still needs to be resolved because I'm not feeling valued. And there's clearly a discrimination issue here before. And I said, and you've even said in the past that you think he's a misogynist, that he has a problem managing women. This is something he did say to me 6 months earlier, and I did not forget it. And he said, well, look, Fotini, I know what you get paid and you're getting paid exactly what you should be. Look at how much more you're making since you started here. I said, well, 5 minutes ago, you said you didn't know what I was getting paid. And now you're saying you do know what I'm getting paid. So which of those two situations is it? Because I'm not sure what to believe anymore. And he went, oh, I can't believe you're being so patronizing to me. And I said, okay, that's interesting. What did I say that was so patronizing? What? Well, when you remember what was so patronizing, by all means, let me know. I can't apologize for something that I didn't know I did. So if I was being patronizing, and if you can recall what that statement was, then I would be happy to apologize. Until that time, I don't know that I was patronizing and I have no proof that I was. So if we can't continue this conversation like two adults, then perhaps we shouldn't continue any further. This is like almost verbatim from everything I can remember. I remember the patronizing comment. I remember exactly how this stuff was said. And all I did was go, oh, you're giving me all this? I'm just going to sit here and say less and let you dig yourself a hole. And then I'm going to use it instead of going, how dare you? I went, oh, well, you said this. So now which one is it? And they just get frustrated and things stop. They stop the behavior that they were doing, or they stop the conversation, and that may be your best outcome as well. So I had control over that conversation, and that made me feel freaking fantastic. So it works. It's a very awkward moment, but if you can go, yeah, I handled myself with poise and with grace and respect for the other person, then you can sit there quietly and go, bring it. What else do you want to talk about? How else should we handle this matter? Just be ready with those questions to put the ball in their court, to force them to treat you like a freaking human being instead of a second-class citizen. It's awkward, but it's actually kind of fun to watch too.
Good. Next question. Do you work at finding out as much as you can about the people you are negotiating with?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is, yeah, I'll look them up on LinkedIn and look at what's their history, what's their working history, what kind of roles do they have, what kind of comments do they make. I look at them. Sometimes I look them up on Twitter and go, who am I dealing with? Because Twitter gives me a lot more color than even LinkedIn does. If I know someone else who's dealt with them, I might ask them, hey, have you ever talked to this person before? I'd love to know your thoughts. I have a meeting coming up. Yeah, absolutely, without question. It's not in a creepy stalker way either. It's whatever is out there in the public forum and whatever anybody might be willing to share with me. I think that's absolutely appropriate.
Good, good. Next question. There is a question that came in off the chat. What are the factors affecting cross-culture negotiation?
So those factors are the same whether you're talking about company culture or geographic culture or ethnic culture or whatever it is. The principle is the same. I have an exercise in my book where I ask you, in fact, we can do it right now. No, I'm not going to do it with you. I'm going to wait for you to do it in the book because I want you to give it the time and required in order to think it through. But what I ask people to do is think about things from the other person's perspective. So the other person may be someone who has a very different educational background from you. It may be somebody who has a very different upbringing from you because they had a different set of privileges. It may be because they came from a different country. And I'd say culturally, it's the same process of thinking about what are they thinking right now? What has their experience been? And how do I anticipate they're going to be interpreting what I say and how I do things? So it doesn't matter whether or not they were raised in India or China, like most of my MBA students were, or that they were raised in a tech company where jeans and t-shirts are normal to go to work in instead of power suits. It's really about thinking about the individual and their entire collective experience. And I say this because even if you were to try and jump to conclusions, so for example, in my MBA class, I mentioned so many of my students are not international students. And so it would be very easy for someone like me to go, okay, well, you come from India. I know enough about negotiations in India and how people operate there that I expect you're going to open extreme and you're going to do this and this. But that person's been taken out of their context and they've been put in Canada. So now they may be going, well, I'm dealing in Canada now, so I'm going to adjust the way I do this type of stuff. So it's thinking about the holistic picture of this individual instead of zeroing in on one characteristic. So I would say my book is now for sale in a number of different countries all over the world because it's not so much about here's the American or the Canadian way of negotiating. It's understanding here's how people think, here's how people reflect on things, here's how you might be perceived. And based on your circumstances, this is the stuff that might work for you. But the number one overriding factor is how are they perceiving you right now? Because even when I talk about power, it's not just actual power that matters, it's perceived power. What are they reading into about you? What are their experiences lending themselves to think about this? If I know, for example, even in my book, I talk about a gentleman, when I bought my first laptop, I was 17. They were the size of cinder blocks back then. And I was given the advice to go to a certain mom and pop shop to buy this laptop instead of going to like the Best Buys and Future Shops of the world that existed back then. And when I walked in and no one gave me the time of day, I was like, okay, I know exactly what's going on here. And it was the patriarchal kind of culture that I grew up in. And I went, I'm not going to do this negotiation today. So I left. I brought my dad back with me. And my dad still to this day knows nothing about computers, by the way. Don barely knows how to turn one on, just figured out this summer how to open up my mom's laptop so that we could video call each other while I was away. And he's pretty proud of himself for that at 72 years old. So back then he knew even less, but I said, here's the specs I want, Dad, and here's the price I expect to get. And he did the negotiation with this gentleman. And the gentleman said to me, you know, if you'd come in here by yourself, I never would have given you this deal. And I could have been super offended. To a degree I was, and I could have lashed out at him and I could have said something really stupid. And instead I looked at him and I went, I know. Why do you think I brought him along? So that was my way of getting the best out of that situation. But it was reading this individual. I live in Canada, right? But those little bits of behavior I got from the first impression when I walked in the door were enough to tell me this is how they operate, the way they talked, the way they looked at me or didn't look at me, the way they spoke to each other and yelled at each other and so on. I'm like, this looks way too familiar. Let me bring my dad in. So it's really thinking about the individual you're dealing with more than just the company, because I can tell people too, well, here's the company over at Walmart, or here, or the culture over at Walmart, here's the culture over in the banks and so on, but you're still dealing with an individual in that organization, and they may have a different style or method or thought process on how they handle things too. So the same parallels happen wherever you are in the world. Sandy, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. And Noreen was the one that asked that question, and no problem. That was a good question. The next one we have, would you say, from Alicia, would you say an extroverted personality type gives you an advantage in the art of negotiation? I have always been on the introverted side and usually put 1,000% to have my work results pave the way so that I don't have to advocate for myself. However, sometimes I wonder how much I'm leaving on the table by not negotiating for more.
So introverts in the audience, I want you to rejoice, because this is your advantage, not your disadvantage. If all you're telling me that's missing is you're not coming to the table, you're not asserting yourself, all I need you to do is take that step to show up. The extroverts actually have it harder, because they may be talking about their accomplishments and stuff, but then they end up going too far and talking themselves out of a deal. So sometimes extroverts actually have a harder time negotiating because they have these bad habits of continuing to sell themselves and justifying way too much and giving away way too much information. So introverts have a much easier time doing this say less, get more. The only thing that's missing from what you're sharing with me is you need to take the first step to actually advocate for yourself. So plan it, prepare for it, practice it in the mirror and say, hey, I have an issue that I'd love to discuss. What can we do about this? Ask a question, and then you get to now take your introverted advantage and sit back and say less and get more. But you're steering the conversation by starting it and pointing it in the direction that it has to go. That's the only obstacle you have in your way. And that introvertedness will be so useful, because introverts, to my knowledge, in my experience, and I am one of them, take their time to think things through. They plan. Right? Even if you're somebody who falls on the DISC scale or the insight scale, and those color personalities, the blues have a much easier time negotiating, because they're the ones who are more likely to be accountants and or analysts and things like that and taking in information. They're going to be very measured in what they say than the reds who are, or the yellows who are talking off the cuff and talking themselves out of a deal. So use that introvertedness as your advantage, knowing that you are going to speak when it's appropriate, that when you have something good to share, but you also have to remind yourself you have great stuff to share. So take that first step to start the conversation and you'll be golden.
Great question, Lisa. Another one here, interesting concept. How do you respond to challenging questions about what it is you're trying to negotiate on the spot? I'm not always quick on my feet. How do you maintain the momentum in a negotiation discussion without getting stumped?
Ask a question right back. So if they ask you a question and you don't know the answer to it, or you're not ready to answer to it yet, or you need a second, you can say, well, that's interesting. Why is that important to you? Or how would that change things? So you can be ready with kind of some automatic responses that will always get them talking a little bit more. And that buys you some time to think. Or you can go, that's an interesting one. Let me think about this carefully before I say something that might be confusing, or I want to make sure I gave you the best articulated answer I can. And literally sit there thinking all you want. You own that moment. You're telling them, I need time. I'm taking this. And you're doing it in such a confident way that they're going to go, okay, I'm going to sit back and wait. She must have something really great to say, because she's literally trying to make sure she gives me the best answer she can. You might want to start writing things down and say, let me just work on that for a second. Let me make sure I give you I don't want to give you misinformation here. I don't want to misspeak. Or that's not something I'd prepared. I'm going to have to come back to you. There's any number of ways to address that, but the easiest one is just ask a question right back and buy yourself some time. Sometimes those questions are there to rattle you, so you can rattle them right back. Sometimes they want some more information that you just don't have, or maybe they're asking a question, but they don't know why they're asking it themselves. So you can dig in a little bit deeper and get to the crux of what actually is holding you back. So those are very simple techniques that you can use to take control of the situation when you don't have to be quick on your feet. The whole point of this is saying, say less, get more. The whole point of this is taking a pause moment and going, I need a minute to think about that. You don't look stupid by saying, I need a minute to think about that. The way you deliver it is going to make you look far more confident and more in control. And they may even feel stupid about asking a question that isn't relevant to what we're talking about.
Great. Another good question. Very good questions, you guys. Great. There's another one here. Does letting go of your ego play a big role in negotiation? For example, having a willingness to let both people win.
Yes, ego is one of the biggest blockades in a negotiation. If you can't park your ego at the door, you're going to be in really big trouble. You will pay for it. And you also have to be so mindful of their ego. And so there are some situations where they need to feel as though they've won. So win-win is language that we hear buzzwords when it comes to negotiation. In the book, I have a model that I talk about, a spectrum of negotiation, where there's more competitive sides of negotiation, there's more collaborative sides. On the more collaborative side, there is a lot of opportunities for win-win because, hey, we're finding things that work for the both of us. On the competitive side, when we're talking about money, it's you win, I lose. You know, if it's about cash, the more cash I have, the more I feel like I won, but the more cash I have, the less you have in your pocket. But even then, they can feel like they've won if you were to say something like, wow, you drive such, even if I'm on a beach in Mexico, it's wow, you drive such a hard bargain. I don't know how you got that much out of me. Or she's going to love this. You know, those little things are ways to make them feel like they've won and feel good about ending this negotiation with you. I talk in the book in one of the later sections about satisfaction and doing the dance. If you were to go buy a house and you were to knock on someone's door and you say, hey, I'm here to offer you $1 million for your house. And they go, okay. What are you going to be thinking? You're going to go, oh God, I gave too much. What's wrong with this house? I just got myself into something awful. But if they went, no, God, no, are you crazy? I would never give you $1 million. You go, okay, how about, and you start offering, you start going back and forth and you end up at 1.5 million. And you go, okay, all right, I'm paying 1.5 million for that. I got them down to 1.5 million. You're going to feel fantastic. You're going to feel like you won, right? And you just paid $500,000 more than you did if they just went, yeah, okay. So you can make them feel like they've won behaviorally in many ways, but that means parking your ego at the door. And it means understanding what's going to make them feel fantastic in that moment. And I give loads of those practical examples in there as well. But yes, ego can be the death of a lot of negotiations. If you understand how their ego works, however, and you know how to park yours at the door, you use that to your advantage to ride it all the way into the sunset.
Good. So here one just came up from Julia. I have a question related to ego, but at a next level. Have you ever negotiated successfully with folks that have psychopath tendencies? For example, no emotions.
I don't know if I've ever dealt with psychopaths. It certainly has felt like that at times, but they are a tiny fraction of the population. And they really do turn a lot of this stuff on its head. So even all of the psychology books will say to you, you know, they will not follow the norm of what studies show us because there's something wired differently in their brains. I would say worry less about dealing with psychopaths, but you will likely come across people who are a few notches below that, who will either be really good at masking their emotions or pretending as though they're unaffected by something. You will also deal with a lot of narcissists. Those are prevalent, especially in high positions, because narcissism and charisma tend to go hand in hand to a degree. It's not going to be, you know, the extreme end of narcissism all the time, but there's a lot of those folks out there. I've done a lot of podcast episodes as a guest on dating and matchmaking podcasts for that reason, relationship advice, because there's so much of this built into our dailies. A lot of the divorces that I help people with are with narcissists who do a lot of gaslighting. That's a term we've all become quite familiar with these days. People who are making you think, am I crazy? Like, they just said that. Why are they telling me they didn't say that? I mean, I was being gaslit by my own bosses and my CEO. That's a norm, right? Those were the epitome of narcissists who think that they've got so much charisma they can wrap you around your little finger. So yes, I have dealt with some very extreme personalities. I wouldn't say I definitely know that I've dealt with a psychopath, but even in those extreme personalities, when you can press your pause button and keep your calm, it can come in really handy and help you through some of the frustration. I was on the phone recently with a friend when she was going back and forth with her, you know, this very intense ex-husband situation. And I was coaching her on what to text back, even though I don't, by the way, I advocate not texting, but in this circumstance, they were not capable of having a phone call together. And And his response was like, she was nailing it so well. His response was like changing it to something else. She's like, her reaction was, are we even having the same conversation? Are we in the same conversation? Because now that he's parked that issue, or now that I put that issue to bed, he's starting out on something else. So it can feel like they're a psychopath, but it's really just people who are desperate and who are grasping at straws, who are narcissistically used to having their way and bullying people into what they want. That when someone who's finally finding their confidence and advocating for themselves starts changing their behavior or not succumbing to that pressure and that bullying, that's when they start to do things that feel even more erratic. And so I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I don't specialize in psychopaths specifically, but I see elements of some of that behavior. But if you are dealing with a psychopath, truly, if you are dealing with someone with some type of disorder, then I absolutely hope that you would start to seek professional help. I feel like the Kanye situation is a huge example in pop culture. He clearly has some issues. I am not a psychologist or psychiatrist to diagnose him, but there is evidence that he's showing it of abusive behavior. And I really hope that someone like a Kim Kardashian is getting professional advice from someone who studies those folks and how to manage them. I hope that helps.
Yes, great advice, Fotini. It looks like we have time maybe for one more question here. And what is the path for rebuilding your reputation as an effective negotiator, after you failed big?
Ooh, that's interesting. So I think with any failure, whether it's a negotiation failure or anything else, it's about showing people what you've learned and how you're using it, right? Because what they're thinking is, oh, you're this person who existed in the past over here. I don't want to put that person in a position again to fail me. Whether it was you smashed a car, whether it was you paid too much for something, whether it was you made some babysitting mistakes and dropped the baby on their head, whatever that past mistake was, then you need to go, that was the person before. Here's what I have learned since then. Here's what I've done to implement it. And here's how I've improved. That's what you need to be working on. To worry less about what went wrong in that, but going, what have I learned from that? Again, it's about focusing on the future versus the past. The simplest kind of analogy I can give you for that is, when you're on hold, for example, let's say you call your telecom company and they're going, when you hear that recording, it's not, so sorry, I've had you waiting for the last 45 minutes and I made this terrible mistake. They don't say that because it's just going to rile you up and go, yeah, I have been waiting for 45 minutes and I've been pissed off. You're not going to remind them of the past so much. What you're going to do is take a book from their page from their book and go, thank you for your patience. You're the next in line. They're going, yes, something has happened. I'm going to move forward. And I'm telling you that this is what the future looks like. So that's what I would encourage you to do. So in the past, things might have gone differently. Here's what I do now as a result of what I've learned on the job or what I've learned in this particular scenario. Build up your reputation based on what you are doing and what you know your potential and your capability is versus dwelling on what you might have done in the past.
Great. That's great. Okay. So first off, I want to give you a huge thank you to Fotini for sharing her time with us. It was wonderful. We had some great questions, great advice. The book, I can't wait to, like I said, I can't wait to get it and start reading it and getting some more tips. We're getting a lot of thank you so much. It was great. So yes, thank you for sharing your time, Fotini, with us and our WXN community here. Oh, it's just coming in. Great info. Thank you for sharing. What a great session. Thank you so much. Oh, it goes on. It's going to keep going on. So here we are at the end of our session, and I would like you to, if you are able to stay on, we have some events that we want to share with you as we wrap up this session. And again, thank you to everyone joining us. It was great. And now we're going to have Gary help us out with the next, first the slides here. Gary, there we go. Okay, so say less, get more: unconventional negotiation techniques to get you what you want. So for anyone that is still with us, this is how you can purchase Fotini's book on Amazon.ca. It will be definitely a great book to get, and so that we can learn even more on how we can say less, which is always great. And now what we will also would like to thank our corporate partners. Thank you to them, and they helped with making this happen today. Thank you to each and every one of you for all that you have done and what you continue to do for WXN. And if anyone is interested in being a member of WXN, we are selling our membership for $99 right now. And that would get you access to events like these, along with other discounted and free events. So for any of the specific members. So if you're interested in that, now is the time to get it. It's at a great price. We also have our Monday Mojo series. You can join us in March and the upcoming months for all of our meet and greet with the top 100 winners and some of our WXN ambassadors. It's a great event, and you'll enjoy it. I'm sure you will. So we are currently accepting nominations for our 2022 Canadian Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Award Summit, happening this May. So nominations will close in March 7th. So hurry and nominate yourself or someone that you know. We do look forward to seeing you all at our summit on May 25th and 26th. And if you have any questions, just let us know about that. And of course, our 2022 Top 100 Awards coming this November. Nominations are open now. They opened a couple weeks ago and will remain open until May 17th. So get those nominations in for yourself, for someone you know, and nominate that Top 100 Canada's Most Powerful Woman. And lastly, we would like to thank you again for attending today's virtual book club. We look forward to seeing you all at all our other future events. And please visit our website, wxnetwork.com, to learn more. Thank you again, Fotini. Thank you again for everyone that joined us today, and we wish you a very happy day ahead. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.